Turkey President Erdogan has completed a meeting with Russia's Vladimir Putin to discuss developments in Syria. He shared concerns with the Russians and warned Europe of a new humanitarian tragedy, tens of thousands of new refugees if Russia and Syria move forward with an assault on the city of Idlib. Joining us is senior counselor at the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies, John Hanna. Mr. Hanna has worked at the highest levels of U.S. foreign policy in both the Clinton and George W. Bush administrations. John, thanks for being here today. So it's the last major stronghold for the rebels. Wouldn't a final assault on Idlib bring an end to the war? What's the concern?
Well, the big concern, as you say, Gary, is this threat of a massive humanitarian tragedy. This would make even the rest of the horrors that we've seen in Syria pale in comparison. You're talking about 3 million people in a very small space that could be driven straight across the Turkish border. Turkey's already got in excess of 3 million refugees that it's accepted from Syria, as you noted, the potential outflow then into Europe, the amount of instability that would cause. This is a disaster waiting to happen, and the only thing standing in the way of that right now are Turkish forces on the ground in Idlib, and American and Western warnings to Vladimir Putin and the Russians that they shouldn't push this too far.
Do you think the Russians get it? Does Putin understand? Will he back off?
I think we have to say that over the last week, I think that what President Trump has managed to do in his warnings, including his tweets about the potential disaster in Idlib, is he's put a pause in Putin's step. It looked like an offensive was imminent in Idlib. And yet, over the course of the last week, all the reports we're getting is at least there's been a temporary stand down of any offensive. I think Putin, first and foremost, is very, very worried about a possible American military action if an offensive goes forward. And he's worried, of course, in the aftermath that he doesn't want to be the person caught holding the bill for any kind of reconstruction effort in Syria. His whole plan and strategy, he's going to break Syria, but make the Europeans and the United States pay for rebuilding Syria. If he goes forward in Idlib now, I think that is forever off the table.
You know, I think many Americans are just trying to understand U.S. policy right now. Is it for Assad to stay? Is it for him to go? What is our policy?
Well, I think there is an unspoken decision now that for the time being, we won't manage to get rid of Assad, that the Russians and Assad and Iranians have, in fact, won that battle. The real game now is what is going to be the future of Iran's military posture inside of Syria. Are they going to be allowed to entrench themselves militarily right on Israel's northern border on the Golan Heights? Or is the United States and Israel and the rest of the West going to insist that the price of allowing this Russian Assad victory in the Syrian civil war, the price that we'll demand for any kind of political settlement is for the Iranians to be driven out of Syria entirely?
How concerned are we right now about Assad's possible use of chemical weapons? And if he does use them, how certain could we be that it would be his regime that has deployed them instead of the rebels?
Well, I think everything that United States senior officials have said in the recent days is that they are very worried. They obviously have picked up intelligence that the Assad regime, for the umpteenth time, is getting ready to use chemical weapons if it goes forward with an offensive in Idlib. I think the U.S. intelligence community at least says that it's very confident that if chemical weapons are used in this instance, it will be by the Assad regime. And in that case, I think it's almost certain the administration has signaled that that will be a red line, which will trigger a use of American military force that will be larger than anything we've seen previously in the Syria conflict.
Now, if Assad stays, how could negotiations succeed? Because I know The rebels and those fighting the regime say they'll not end the war until he actually steps aside.
Well, I think you're just going to have to paper over that there is going to be some kind of interim period in which a new government informed. Assad may still be the nominal head of that government, but it will probably have to include members of some kind of acceptable opposition, rebel opposition in that government. That will eventually lead to some kind of election, new constitution, and decentralization in Syria, and perhaps at some point in time, Assad eventually stepping down. But I think even there are rebel leaders now that understand the immediate ouster of Assad as part of an immediate political settlement is probably not in the cards any longer.
And finally, many of our viewers, as you know, are concerned about the plight of Syrian Christians. They've suffered terribly over the past 6.5 years. And what priority should they be given to receive religious or political asylum in the United States? Many are still wanting to come here.
Oh, I think it should be a very high priority for the United States to give aid and comfort to those religious minorities and groups that have been explicitly targeted by a one side or the other in this awful civil war. The great tragedy, of course, of that is that Syria, as well as other parts of the Middle East for millennia, have been places of great religious and ethnic diversity. And unfortunately, we're seeing all of that disappear, and it will be to the great detriment of the Middle East, which already has so many problems, to be losing these populations that over the centuries have made so many tremendous contributions to whatever peace and prosperity and diversity that those societies have previously enjoyed.
Okay, Mr. John Hanna of the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies, thank you for your insights today, sir.
Thank you, Gary.